to Back for Our Future, the podcast that goes back to look at our future and yours too. I'm Drew Hall, and with me today, as always, is the man, the myth, the legend, the gentleman who puts steel trap in steel trap memories, Tony Nick Najati. How are you, Tony?
Good, bro. How are you?
I'm good. Aside from this stupid mirror incident, we were talking right before we started. I have this dumb broken mirror on my truck now that's going to cost me more than I would like it to fix it.
That's crazy. Everything's so expensive.
I know. If it was, I wish I could get things at 1990 prices.
Yeah. 1990 prices would be great. Unfortunately, that's not the way the world works.
No, we're in 1990 times 10 pricing. So it is what it is at this point.
Yeah.
Big show today, fun show today. Looking forward to it. Before we get to that, quick apology on my behalf. Some of you, if you're paying close attention, you may have realized I did drop an episode out of order. That has been remedied. So there's a little jump in the mix there, but you probably won't even notice it going forward, but it was there. Also, just shout out to everybody who's listened. I've gotten a lot of great feedback. I know Tony has too. So thank you folks for listening. But if you haven't yet, just give us a little plug on your favorite podcast network, whatever it may be, whether it's Apple or not Google anymore, Apple or Spotify. We'd love it. We're also on YouTube if you'd like to watch along. It's always another thing. If you just want to see two gentlemen's faces talking at you about movies for an hour, then you can also do that over on YouTube. We've also thrown some shorts up there, just little clips, just little fun bits. And then, of course, you can follow us on all of our social outlets, which is a lot of fun content, pictures going up there, lots of different things. So if you haven't followed us on Facebook, Twitter, then I highly suggest you do so because there's a lot of great ancillary content that comes out.
Oh, yeah.
Good stuff indeed. Tony, what's your take on ninjas?
You know, I've always been a fan of the Ninja. You know, and I especially like them in their turtle format.
That's right. I was the first movie we're going to talk about, and it's actually all of them because Tony's going to tee that up in a second. But what I thought was funny is that your little brother, younger than us by a few years, and I had a cousin that was 3 years. So between my cousin, who was like a little brother to me, and your actual little brother, we kind of covered the gap. We got a 10-year gap in there that we can play with. But what I thought was really interesting is when we were kids growing up, nowadays, I think about that episode of The Office where Michael Scott and Ed Helms and Rainn Wilson are jumping around doing parkour. We were doing that, but we didn't know the word parkour. Everything was ninja. I'm a ninja. It's always... So ninja was the trend in the 90s. I mean, there's Michael Dudikoff with American Ninja. Oh, yeah. Tony knows I love those movies. So anyway, so it was a kind of an interesting thing seeing this tee up. So that said, Tony, talk to me about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I know we have a specific one of these movies, but let's talk Turtles. Turtle talk time.
Obviously, we're in 1993, and the Turtles, will put out the third of that trilogy in 1993. But we want to talk about all three of them real quick. And, I was always a big fan of these movies. I mean, they all did really well at the box office. And I enjoyed the first one immensely. And then the second one, like a little bit better soundtrack. And they put Vanilla Ice into it. And, got a little more pop culture, trying to get a little more cool. And then the third one, maybe not as good as the first one, but I thought it was still really, really entertaining. I mean, I worked with Elias Koteas, who played Casey in these films.
Love that guy.
And he's a great guy. And we did a movie called My Own Love Song with Renee Zellweger and Forrest Whitaker and Nick Nolte. Wonderful, wonderful man. And I thought he was great in these films as well. I've always been a fan of the Turtles. My brother was really a fan of the Turtles. He had all the VHS cartoons. He had all the figures, so I got to play with those for a little bit.
Right.
And, it's funny because, they're just still pretty mainstream now. I was just having a conversation with my brother the other night about these WWE wrestling figures that are coming out, and they're going to be as done as Ninja Turtles.
Right.
So I mean, that's still very. I mean, obviously they've got more movies out now, and they just did another animated movie, and they had done some live action ones within the last 10 years to reboot a little bit. And yeah, I mean, it's always been a pretty successful franchise, and this is where it all began, pretty much. So I enjoyed these films immensely. To get to see these kinds of characters. This is back in an era where we're not used to all the Marvel movies, a ton of DC movies, all these superhero type films coming out. We're not getting that, getting inundated with all that all the time. So these were a kind of a joy to get to see in the theater.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I remember when the first one came out, we saw it. I remember seeing it. And I remember it was like, oh man, it was great. It was fun. These are practical suits. There's not a lot of CG in this. It's all practical driven stuff. They're wearing actual costumes with articulating mouths and eyes that are robotic. I mean, it was a lot of, they put a lot of work into making those movies happen. And I remember when seeing them, the one thing, like, I think it was the second one or the third one. By that time I was a little bit older, more knowledgeable, more worldly, if you will. And I do remember the fact that, like, most people at the time didn't realize that, because it's a silly name, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was actually more of an adult-based comic book by Eastman and Laird. And it was black and white, and it was gritty, and it was almost noirish and super violent. And they adapted it for kids, I believe, by Playmates, was who made the toys. So it's arguably one of those things where they made the toys to make the movies, or they it was one of those things where the toys, it was all big toy commercial at the end of the day, but it was so popular, it just blew up in pop culture. I remember seeing Ninja Turtles 2 with my dad, which, poor guy, as a grown man watching that, he did not, he's a doctor, so he was just not into Vanilla Ice on stage singing, "Go Ninja, go," as I remember all that garbage. But they were fun at the time frame. They were fun as kids, and I still watch the movies with my girls now. We'll watch, they've seen the original ones, but then we watch the updated stuff too, and they like it okay. I mean, there's no girls, so they kind of miss out on the idea. For them, they don't totally relate, but they'll watch it with daddy to be nostalgic.
Yeah, I remember us having the conversation when that second Turtles movie came out. I remember us down at there's like the Owens down the street had like an Easter egg party, like
Yeah.
an Easter party, and we were talking about that very movie and you going to see it um, at that party. So it
Oh
was
yeah.
fun. I mean, I love the nostalgia of that, and sometimes people will see things like Vanilla Ice in a second movie, and they'll say something to the effect of, "Oh, that dates the movie." I always thought that was kind of a cool thing, because it kind of lynches it and keeps it right in that era. You know what I'm saying? Which is kind of a cool concept to me.
I love the idea of it being, so what's funny is I think if you get removed from it enough, like, 10, 15 years, especially when you get removed from it enough, what happens is it's not just nostalgia, because it is, but it also, to your point, it is an anchor of time. Like, we're anchored to this very specific moment. Vanilla Ice was hot. Ninjas were hot. Why would you not put those together? I have no idea. To put this in perspective, one of my favorite movies that would have been much better with Ninja Turtles is this terrible movie called Jim Cotta. And yeah, he laughs because he knows the joke. But like, Jim Cotta is this awful movie where, again, and this is a little more 80s, but it's that same time frame of like, take anybody you can, make them a ninja. Well, this was Kurt something. Anyway, he was a gymnast, an Olympic gold gymnast. And so this movie, Jim Cotta, features more absurdity than a Ninja Turtle movie. Ninja Turtles was more grounded in reality than this movie that was not about Ninja Turtles at all, right? So it's just the idea that Kurt Thomas, that's it, Kurt Thomas. And he plays Jonathan Cabot. I know the trailer too well. Anyway, it's a wacky movie if you've ever seen it. That said, it is way less realistic than Ninja Turtles. So that should tell you something about the craze. So the fact that Vanilla Ice is in it and there's ninjas in it makes it a fun thing. Ninja Turtles 3, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a long time since I've seen that one. And I can tell you it didn't leave as much of an impact. I believe they time travel. Is that correct? Is this the
Correct.
one they go back into? Yeah.
Yeah. Do a little of that, and yeah, I mean it by the end, it's one of those situations, right? I mean, when you have movies in a franchise, more often than not, not always, there obviously are some extenuating circumstances, but more often than not, by the time you get to the third one, it's starting to trail off a little bit. I mean, the box office is starting to go down and things like that.
Right.
And that's kind of what happened here. I mean, they got out while the getting was good with this trilogy and didn't push the envelope trying to make more of them. So that was a good idea.
So some of the voices in this movie there wasn't it some legitimate human beings like
Yeah, I mean,
voice wise?
yeah, they got. I mean, Donatello was voiced by Corey Feldman,
Right.
who this is kind of like his last big, you know, mainstream A-list type role. To be
Right.
honest,
Fair point. Fair
he's the
point.
biggest voice in this group of guys. But I mean, yeah, I mean that was kind of his last big thing. I mean, was voicing Donatello, and I mean he's done a bunch of stuff since then, but it's been mostly direct to video type stuff.
Yeah. This was a solid one. I mean, I enjoy them. I think they're fun. Like I said, I've watched the first two with my kids. I haven't watched the third one because it just didn't resonate as much in my brain. Not saying it's a bad movie or any comment on it, but I just don't remember it. I do remember the pieces I do remember from it, though, that at some point in the Ninja Turtle toy line, there was a rabbit that was a samurai. I don't even want to try and pronounce his name. But I remember I was so excited that maybe he was going to show up in Turtles 3 because they go back in time, but that is, if memory serves, that is not the case. Which would have, he was like my favorite. I watched my little brother or my little cousin play with him, and he just loved that, and I loved that figure, and so we always wanted to see him, but we never
I'm
did.
sure you saw him a lot at my house because I mean my brother had those things out all the time,
He sure did.
and he played Turtles all the time. And the thing is, the funny thing about his collection was he had them all. I mean, he had them all, and like all the different variants of turtles and stuff like that. He had all of them, and he still does. They're still here. They're here somewhere, and they were all in a bag, um, and the bag was a Ninja Turtle bag. So it was like
That's
this
even better.
big burlap bag, and it had a turtle emblem on it, and that's where he housed his collection of turtles as well. And yeah, he had all the guys, and then like I said, he had all those VHS tapes that I think I just ran into in the storage area not too long ago.
No, that's
So
wild. Totally wild.
great,
Yeah,
great
it's one of the.
trilogy.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I say great trilogy, fun trilogy. I mean, it was fun to get to see those, especially at that age range, being like 14 years old, 13,
Oh
14,
yeah.
15 years old. So
Yeah, and in that same era, something interesting happens with the next movie on the list that we're going to talk about, and it's very fascinating because a lot of times this is not a political statement by any means, but a lot of times there were things happening inside the film industry that were very quote would be considered progressive nowadays, but they were just really interesting ways to approach filmmaking, and one of those is the fact that you have this extremely talented. I think she might have some awards, but you have this extremely talented actress, Marley. Is it Marlene
yeah,
Matlin? Whatever. What was her
Marley.
name? Yeah. You have this extremely talented actress go and be in this really fantastic thriller called Hear No Evil, that most people don't think about. And it goes back to another one of those points of where, like, here's a strong female, here's someone who's hearing impaired, and her character has to solve a situation hearing impaired. So it's like, we've always done things of putting interesting characters in roles, and so it's another testament of like, hey, if you look back a little bit, we were doing that stuff. Maybe we don't do enough now, but we did back then somewhat. We did do some of that stuff, and I think it's kind of an interesting take, at least my opinion on it, not necessarily reflective of Tony or anybody else involved in the show, but my opinion on it. So Hear No Evil, that comes out, it looks like March 26th. Tee that up. What's that scoop there?
Yeah, it literally comes out like a week after Turtles 3. And I saw this one at Carmike 10, which is in West Mobile. We've established that. And yeah, I mean, and by the way, it's another DB Sweeney film. We've talked about
Oh,
him.
that's right.
We've
That's
talked about
right.
him in great detail on this show before. So yeah, it's Marley Matlin, and for those of people who don't know much about her, she's deaf, and but she can speak. So it's
Right.
so she's deaf, but she can speak. But the character in this, um, she sees, I mean, it's your typical thriller. I mean, it's she sees a crime, and then there's a ruthless cop that comes after her, and stuff like that. So I mean, it's a great cast. It's her and D.B. Sweeney and Martin Sheen and John C. McGinley, and yeah, and it also has the distinction of being, when you flip around this stand up that I've talked about on this show for The Vanishing, I have this big giant stand up like you see at movie theaters for promoing movies, and they're always out in the hallway, and everyone's always like, "Those are cool," but I would never have one of those in my house. I did have one of these in my home, and it still resides in my storage unit. And it was for The Vanishing. That's the movie I wanted to show everybody. But if you flipped it around, it was Hear No Evil.
So was it, when you say it was 2 and 1, was it like the cutout was just one shape of cutout, or was it two separate cutouts?
So yeah, I'll have to put this. I have a photo of how this all
Oh,
goes
sweet.
that I'll put on our socials. But as far as, yeah, if it was, so basically two cutouts. So you had to put together one side, and then the other side flipped over, and it was a totally different movie. It was pretty awesome. I mean, I just only ever showed the one film because I was only interested in looking at Nancy Travis and The Vanishing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's actually Hear No Evil. It is a paint by numbers a little bit, but the cast, as you said, the cast is good, and it's been a while since I've seen it. I remember catching part of it on like HBO or something years ago, back when pre-streaming days. But I remember watching some of it, and she stuck with me. Like, I know her name, I remember her. If I see her in things, I appreciate her, just because I just remember her performance being so good. And it was specifically that movie, which was my first introduction to her. Whenever I saw this, I don't remember seeing it or where I saw it, but it's one of those that will stand up for me forever, or stand out to me forever on that side of it. Now, we're going to go into a little section here that I have some questions about, because I don't remember. I remember one of these movies, but dear Lord, I don't remember The Adventures of Huck Finn at all.
So I wanted to go into this because all these movies come out a week later, April 2nd, and I wanted to kind of go into this a little bit because we'll have four movies here. They all come out the exact same day. And this is what I wanted to talk about, because this is how movies can kind of cannibalize each other at the box office. And this is one of those perfect examples to kind of talk about with our viewers and our listeners. And I mean, we had four movies come out. I'll name them all right now, and then we'll get into the various stories of them. But The Adventures of Huck Finn does come out. Cop and a Half comes out. Uh, Jack the Bear comes out, and so does The Crush. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and it's pretty good. Like, Huck Finn is like an $11 million movie. It does like 26 million, so it does pretty well. And then Cop and a Half was a pretty big hit. That did really well. And then The Crush was like a $5-6 million movie that did like 13-14 million. And but then it kind of cannibalizes a movie that I actually view as one of the better films of the year, which is Jack the Bear. And I found that to be very disheartening. Of course, they did a bad job marketing that film as well, but that movie makes like $5 million. And so that's kind of why I wanted to kind of go into these films a little bit, to let people know that you can have really good films that don't necessarily do well at the box office, um, that are outstanding movies, and the only reason they don't do well is because they come out on a week where they have four or five other movies come out with it. And
It's interesting, though.
off the shuffle.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's interesting, though, that The Crush, I always thought The Crush, because I remember seeing it, I always thought The Crush did better. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, you have Mark Wahlberg and Alicia Silverstone, right? The same movie I'm thinking of here, right? Yeah.
No,
Uh,
Gary Ellis.
Carrie Ellis. Sorry, Carrie Ellis. Carrie Ellis. And you have this movie that has this really strong cast in it. That's a more or less a, is it PG-13 or R? I can't even remember.
Or yeah, no, it's. I mean, it's a really good thriller. I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, obviously, is that the one you want to talk about right now?
No, I just was going to say from a perspective of like it was counter programming. So that's something that maybe a lot of people don't understand, like, or haven't heard that term. Maybe they have, but a lot
Yeah,
of times when movies release stuff, I'm sorry.
it was R rated.
Yeah, it was R rated. So it's counter programming to, and Jack the Bear was PG, if I'm not mistaken, is it not?
No, no, that also is R.
Okay. So you have two R rated features, one a drama, one a thriller, and then you have two kids' films. That's pretty good. I would argue, to your point, it is cannibalization for sure. What
PG
was that?
13.
PG 13. Okay. So you literally run the gambit. And in theory, in counter programming world, The Crush should have been the counter programming to those kids' movies. Like the kids are going to go see that. Maybe the parents go see that. Jack the Bear being the anomaly because it's a maybe a dramedy if you want to call it that. I just think it's really fascinating that in the terms of film industry, sometimes you'll see counter programming. The biggest, most recent example of that is Oppenheimer and Barbie counter programming. You have a two very distinct movies that everybody apparently saw together.
Yeah, but
Anyway, all
back
right, let
this day it was more like they would release 4 or 5 movies in a weekend, and
right.
this would happen like something would fall between the cracks that was actually quite good, and it will happen to big movies like ones that universally are loved, like Shawshank Redemption, that doesn't do well at the box office because it comes out on a weekend, where there's other movies.
Yeah, it is very interesting that it goes that path. So let's just go through them. Give me the Huck Finn scenario because I don't even remember that movie at all.
So I thought this movie was interesting because at the time, there, we're in 1993. There really isn't a big release of these types of films that are based on huge novels. I mean, we haven't really. I mean, yeah, there are movies that are like that, but this is a big Disney film that comes out, and has Elijah Wood and Courtney B. Vance and the Adventures of Huck Finn, and it's based off a classic tale, and they pretty much stick with it, for the most part. And it's directed by Stephen Sommers, who did the Mummy movies
Mm.
with Brendan Fraser, and Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, and I mean, it's quite a good movie, and I mean, if you're into the Huck Finn stories and the Tom Sawyer's and stuff like that, I mean, it's well worth watching for sure if you haven't seen it already. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a good movie, and Elijah Wood does a very good job as Huck Finn.
Oh, cool. I may go back and check it. I don't think I've ever seen it, but I may go back and rewatch or watch for the first time, maybe with the kids just to see, just because it sounds like a good one on that side. Now, I have seen Cop and a Half.
So there's a story behind this one, right? So Cop and a Half, great film. Henry Winkler directed The Fonz. The Fonz.
Hey,
Hey, directs this film, and stars Burt Reynolds and the late great Ray Sharkey. This is his last movie before he passes away. And Norman D. Golden is the kid, and this is kind of like that movie that came out that week that was kind of really a mainstream movie for the whole family. And what happened here is, and I'm going to tee this up a little bit. When we lived on our cul-de-sac, we live on our cul-de-sac on Charlotte Oaks there. One of the families that lives on the cul-de-sac with us down the street are the Gottfrieds. And Mike Gottfried, for those of you that don't know, was without question the number one commentator for ESPN college football at the time. Him and Ron Franklin were the number one Saturday night team for college football. I mean, that was the team. They were number one announcing team on ESPN, bar none. They were paired with Adrian Karsten. They were wonderful, and I would get to go with those guys all over the place. I mean, I was lucky enough to be. I've been friends with Mike for many years, and I got to do all kinds of stuff. Go to college games, and I'd eventually work with ESPN and stuff like that. And I think both of us did actually.
yep.
And then, um, yeah, I mean, they lived right down the street. I'd go over. I'd go swimming at their house. I'd play Nerf basketball with them all the time, and we always had fun. I mean, it was great. It was great growing up in the street with them. And I got to go to his radio show and help produce it, and him and Joe Gottfried. I mean, it was a dream come true for a sports fan like myself. And every once in a while, we would go see movies together. And so Cop and a Half was that movie that night. And we saw it opening weekend. And we went to Montasia, which is the mini golf place that's right next to Carmike 10. And we went there and we saw Cop and a Half. We loved it. It was absolutely hilarious. It's a good movie. It's funny. It's kind of a buddy cop movie with, but it just so happens it's a cop and a kid. But
Right.
but yeah, it's a great film, and I enjoyed it, and one of Henry Winkler's better films as a director for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is it's a good family film because it holds up. Again, I haven't seen it in a minute, but it holds up from memory. And it's just one of those very 90s type movies where you take two opposing forces and you put them together and you create something new. And that was like the big formula in the 90s for a lot of stuff, but this one works really well. And it is a fun, it's a stamp of approval on that side of things. Now getting into The Crush, we get into a movie where every, not to go back to us being boys again, but every dude in the world had a crush on Alicia Silverstone at this age.
Yeah, I mean, I would
She was,
say that. I mean, you're teed it up perfectly because I was going to say that very thing.
yeah,
Everybody loved Alicia Silverstone, and this movie is where it begins, without question.
100%.
I mean, it's her first movie. It's her first movie, and it's a good film, and it's an erotic thriller. It's a psychological erotic thriller, and it stars Alicia Silverstone and Carrie Ellis, and it's quite good. I mean, if you're into movies like Fatal Attraction and Hand That Rocks the Cradle and those types of films that came before it, I mean, this is just more of a movie that's more based around like the teens and the 20-year-olds. That's kind of what this is marketed to, whereas those are more towards maybe the more middle age group. But I thought it was a really good movie. I enjoyed it. I mean, I always liked it.
I think in today's climate, the movie, not changing anything, but in today's climate, the movie's 10 times creepier and 10 times more uncomfortable than it was when you're seeing it in a theater because we're much more knowledgeable about certain things going on and different conversations. That makes the impact of the movie now just like, oh God, it's cringy, but in a way that you can't look away. It's just one of those scenarios of, it's a really, I mean, obviously my brain is chemically balanced on this film towards the fact that she's awesome and hot in it. But I do remember it is one of those movies that I think is overlooked, and it's an interestingly, like I said, now it's a disturbing thriller, but back then it was just like a really erotic, not erotic in a porno way, but just like it has to do with relationships. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. I think it's an interesting one for sure.
I wanted to talk about this too because Alicia Silverstone, I mean, this is a big year for her because she's going to have this movie and it's going to do pretty well. And it's her first film and it's her first like starring role. And the other thing that's going on at the time, and we do like to talk about music on this show, is a little band, maybe you've heard of them, called Aerosmith, is going to release a behemothly massive album called Get a Grip, which is sold over 20 million copies to this day. In an era where selling 20 million copies really meant something, and
Absolutely.
to get up off your butt and go pick it up at the local record store or your store, wherever you bought that stuff, or your Columbia House or wherever, and and yeah, she's going to appear in 3 of these videos. 2 of them in 1993 and one of them in early 94, and that's going to make her just as big of a star as if she had been in 5 movies. I mean, because MTV was massive in 1983. It's still huge. It's a joke today, but back in that era, we loved it. I mean, you and I watched MTV all the time. And
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because that's how we communicated music in that window of time. A lot of ways is you might hear about a new release coming out, and I don't remember when CMJ started, whenever we would have had Colic Music Journal. That's somewhere in that era, maybe later, closer to the 2000s. But we the you found music by either someone telling you about or someone saw a music video. So back then, music videos were the best commercials for albums on the planet. Nowadays, they're just kind of part of the process. They're thrown away. They're YouTube releases. I mean, there's a lot of creators out there that just put out YouTube videos in terms of musicians. But this was like, to Tony's point, this was huge. And the fact that she gets a huge starring career, that people know her, and she has a couple of blowout hits coming up film wise, is insane to me. That's where we go with it. It's pretty wild when you think through it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought it was a really interesting career path because I mean she's got this decent sized movie, but then all of a sudden just blows up because of these videos, these music videos, and her and Liv Tyler are like, every time a guy goes to sleep at night are dreaming of these two girls. I mean, let's
Right.
be honest,
Right.
that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very fascinating thing that this is her first film. And I mean, it shows that she has some real chops, because it's a dense topic. Again, just to preface it, in today's terms, the movie is a little more uncomfortable than it was then. Not excusing anything. It's just, we have a little more awareness, if you will, but
Yeah,
it's definitely an interesting film.
yeah. We don't make the movies here, and at least not these. We didn't make these films. We just talk
That's
about them.
right. Now, I am curious to get your take. So, Jack the Bear is next on the list, and I'm just going to go off memory, and you correct me. That is a Danny DeVito film?
It's a wonderful Danny DeVito film. It's an
Okay.
absolutely amazing film that I still to this day am kind of upset that it got lost in the shuffle. That's kind of why I brought this up. I mean, it was perfect timing. I love this movie, and it did get lost in the shuffle a bit. And I caught it uh, towards the back end of its release at Movies 10. And I had seen the trailers coming up and kind of thought it was going to be this family drama about Danny DeVito and his two sons and him raising these two kids as a single father. And that is part of what this is, but there's a thriller element in this movie that runs through it. There's a villain in this movie, played wonderfully by Gary Sinise, and we also get to see some Julia Louis Dreyfus if you're a Seinfeld fan. So I mean, and the thing I love about this film, and where I identify with it so much, is it's based in the '70s, so it's kind of cool. And then they're in Oakland in the '70s. Danny DeVito's playing this like Svengoolie type character where he's on late night television, uh, doing monster movies and stuff like that, which I thought was kind of a cool concept for a lead. And then also, you get these two younger kids that are in here, and they've kind of got the same dynamic as my brother and I, which is they're several years apart. And so I thought I really identified with the characters. I just thought this was a wonderful movie, really well rounded. Like a boring family drama or anything like that. It's got a lot of thriller in it, and it's a wonderful film. Gets lost in the shuffle because they don't market it as a thriller by any means, and I think that kind of did a disservice to the film overall.
Yeah, it's a real shame, because as you started talking about it, I started remembering more and more. Um, the relationship that they have is I just remember the feeling I get from thinking back on it is just like a really sort of like a heartwarming vibe. Not that the movie is heartwarming, but that you walk away from it with a sense of appreciation for the family inside of it. I don't know. I remember the relationship between the brothers, and I remember the relationship with their dad. I don't remember Gary Sinise, and I don't remember Julia Louis Dreyfus in it, but I just remember there being like, I remember the feeling of the movie more than I can the actual plot details in this
Yeah, I
instance.
mean they lose their mom in a car accident after she's been in an argument with Danny DeVito, and
Right.
so now he has to raise these children on his own, and then they have a nanny that comes in and stays with them so that he can go off and do his show at night, and and um, and so she's like a housekeeper nanny, and then they kind of get into it with a neighbor that lives across the street, which is played by Gary Sinise, and he's kind of this like um, neo-Nazi skinhead type, white supremacist type, and they get into this whole thing where one neighbor blames the other, and that whole scenario, and then it leads to a bunch of really good scenes.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to put it on the list to rewatch only because I love the fact that it's set in the 70s. This is another thing that's really interesting. Movies like that, yeah, it came out in the 90s. But when they're set, if it's something that came out in the 90s but it's still set in the 70s, this is going to make us feel cringy for a second. They're closer to the 70s than than we are to the 90s in some cases, depending on what era. But like the idea that they're closer to it. So you're seeing a film that's maybe even more historically accurate than what you would have seen if we made a like the Elvis movie that came out a few years ago. Obviously, that's Baz Luhrmann. It's very different, but we're closer to that era than we are the 70s era. So I guess my point is like it's interesting to see films back in that space that go back like that. They also makes them a little timeless, and it makes them where you don't feel like you're watching a 90s film, except for maybe by the fact that it was actually shot on film. Otherwise, it makes it a timeless experience, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, and you get a young Reese Witherspoon in this movie as well. She's in it, and also the great thing about this film, shot on film, it has a really good look that puts us back into the '70s. Which, yeah, it's a great film.
Yeah, I'm actually going to add that one. I have a little list that we create almost every episode, but I'm putting that one back on the top of the list. I feel the need for some Jack the Bear, just to watch through that. So I got to be honest with you, Tony. The next movie on this the next movie on this list is a midnight movie.
Yep.
It's a midnight movie you see with your mother,
Right.
and it's a midnight movie you see with your mother called Indecent Proposal.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I listen. My mom and I have no shame when it comes to movies. Like we'll watch anything together. It doesn't really matter. And
Oh, it's
and
beautiful.
get a lot of these awkward conversations like this. It's funny because for anybody that knows us, I mean, our moms are friends and stuff like that, but they're at this point kind of very different in how they go about certain things. And
Yeah.
I don't see you at the midnight movie with your mom watching a proposal, but that's the way it is in our family. We did this, but I mean, yeah, again, nobody really in the theater except mom and I watching Indecent Proposal. Woody Harrelson and Robert Redford and Demi Moore, and it's a good. I mean, it's a good movie. Let's be honest. I mean, I enjoyed it immensely when I
It
first saw it, and mom loved it, and yeah, I mean, I
it's
highly recommend it.
It's look, and it creates one of the most iconic scenes for anyone in the '90s is that roll around the money bit. I mean
Yeah.
that's never going anywhere. And even the idea of Indecent Proposal, it becomes a pop culture moment all throughout the rest of the years. It pops up in different places. It becomes part of conversation. But that roll around the money bit, that's pretty serious. That's a serious little
I mean,
gag there.
it was a huge hit, and and people were talking about it for a long time about this whole concept of what would you do for $1 million. And I mean, this is
Right.
kind of where it begins. I mean, just with this
Right.
movie. I mean, it's kind of stood the test of time, and has been a movie that gets has been talked about quite a bit since it came out.
And look at the reality of it is, as an adult, it's a perfectly fine film for adults on that side or mature people like you were. But as a kid, I wouldn't have had any concept of what that even means. I'd been like, yeah, heck yeah, you can. My girlfriend will come sleep with you for $1 million. I wouldn't know the difference one way or the other. I just. But then as an adult, you start thinking about it, and that's what makes the movie so much more intriguing is just the idea of this, and then the complexity of it, and then after a while, it's one of those films where, to me, like the concept, once it starts to settle in, you're like, oh, mm, oh. It's easy to say something on the flash of the pan, but then when you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, this is I don't think I could play this game. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
No, I mean, I agree. I agree. It goes back to the whole cringy concept a little bit, but I mean, it's still a good movie, and I've worked with Woody a few times, and since then on some movies, and good guy, and yeah, I mean, I love the cast, and that was one of the things. Like when I wanted to see movies, part of the reason I wanted to see them was I was a huge fan of some of these actors too, you know,
Right.
and that's one of the things that gets me to movies, and I will go see a movie just because certain people are in them. I still do that to this day. I mean, that's very much. I see pretty much everything out in theaters, but obviously, I'll see movies with certain guys that I like and certain female actresses and stuff like that that I like above others.
No, no, I'm with you. I get it. I mean, but that's the appeal of a star. I mean, that's the whole point. And I think in our industry, one of the things that comes across is I think sometimes, unfortunately, this is not a pleasant statement for them to hear, but sometimes crew forgets the fact that like ain't many people going to see a movie because of the production designer or the DP or even the director. Sometimes you got big names like Spielberg and some of the Scorsese guys like that. Sure, Tarantino, but not all the time are people going to see the director. And in fact, most people don't even know who directs the stuff anymore. And they're just going to see it for the stars or the property, whatever the IP might be. If it's Spider-Man, obviously, it doesn't matter if it's Tobey Maguire or whatever that kid's name, Tom.
Andrew Garfield or any of the guys.
Yeah, right. You're going to see Spider-Man, and so this though, but the reality of it is most people, with the exception of those, most people go see movies for the actors. I mean, let's be honest, they want to see what they're doing. And certainly in the 90s, especially that timeline, you're selling the actor. This is still part of, I would argue, still part in the golden age of filmmaking. It goes away in the 2000s. That's a whole separate podcast we're going to do after this one's done. But it goes away a little bit to me in the 2000s. But the 90s, up until a certain point, this is still the golden age of filmmaking where stars meant something. The directors had to put in a lot of effort. They were shooting on film, which changes the way the scripts were written. There's a whole big, long diatribe. So the fact that this movie exists the way it does, I think is interesting. I haven't seen it in a long time. I kind of want to watch it again because the cringe factor might be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, you've been married for a long time now.
Yeah, but I've been married long enough to say yes.
Well, I set that up, didn't I?
You sure did, pal. We call that the alley-oop. That's called the alley-oop. The Tony and Drew, only brothers can do that kind of work, pal. Speaking of a film, though, that so whereas Indecent Proposal might change the scope of conversations in the adult realm, the next movie on this list, I would love to make the jokes sidekicks, but that's not going to work. But the next movie on this list is The Sandlot, and let's be honest, if Indecent Proposal changed the landscape for film adults watching movies, The Sandlot literally changed the game. I would call that movie one of the most flawless films made in the sense of it. Again, another movie takes place in the past. You can watch that movie, and if you do not, maybe if you're a girl, it's not so much, but as a boy, you can watch that movie, and the relationship you have with that film is forever going to be special.
So it came out the same day as Indecent Proposal.
Counter programming.
Counter programming goes back to that. And it did okay at the box office. Certainly not a massive hit, because Indecent Proposal was a massive hit. So it's one of those things, obviously different, but I would argue, and I don't know if you agree with me, I would argue that this movie is bigger now
Yep.
than it was when it first came out.
100%. 100%.
I go to St. Louis Cardinal games all the time and baseball games, and they're doing bobbleheads of these characters now. And I have them, so I know they exist. And they're doing bobbleheads of these characters now in the last 3 years, 4 years, last handful, several years. They've been doing all these bobbleheads for these characters, and like you said, since 2016, and that is 23 years after the fact. And this movie was a good movie. It's obviously a great movie, but it was a good movie when I first saw it. And I was like, oh, this is a cool film, and it's a lot of fun. And now it's taken on this life of its own, like it was this big monster hit, and it really wasn't. But it is a great film.
Yeah, see, I think it's fascinating because I feel like it's one of those movies. A lot of times people will say, certain movies don't age well. This is a movie that not only aged well, to your point, it literally found its own after a period of time. My kids have seen it. We watch when it's on. I watch it regularly. My kids know the soundtrack. We make jokes about Zeus. All of those things, all of the components of it, it just works so well. And my kids aren't big baseball fans, but they understand it. But when I watch it now as an adult, and I think this is what resonates, because that movie represented a bygone era, the 90s, of which it represented when we would have seen it as young people, is also a bygone era. So the very thing that the movie's about is the very thing that we're experiencing now, looking back on it, having experienced the movie, if that makes sense. That's very philosophical in nature. Whereas my kids haven't grown up enough yet to have the distance to be like, well, we all grew up and grew apart. Like, what happened to certain kids, even kids on our street? Where'd they go? Like, they moved away. They went on. There's kids from Michigan. I don't remember their names. I just remember they're scumbag Michigan fans. That's all I remember. But they're gone. Those kids moved away. Where did they go? That was our Sandlot time. Like, they were in that window. They were there somewhere in that frame. So it's just those kind of things of like people moving on. And so now I think that's why, to your point, I think what's happened is the memory of that movie is also a warm feeling of the memory of where we were at the time when we saw it. And that's why I think it's such a fascinating, massive movie. At least to me, it's why it's so fascinating.
Oh no, it's great, and I mean, this is a perfect example of a movie um, tugging at the heartstrings and bringing back nostalgia and people just embracing it. I mean, because this is that kind of film, like you said. I mean, you wonder where your friends go. I think about them all the time. I think about certain people, and I'm kind of like, where did those people go? I mean,
Right.
I can't even remember their last name. You know, it's like I can't even look them up if I wanted to. You know, it's like that kind of thing. Or I maybe didn't even know their last name, to be honest with you. But uh, but yeah, I mean, and it's just a wonderful film. It's got a fun cast, and you know, you get James Earl Jones. You get a great dog character. I mean, it's you know, it's got all the stuff, and it's baseball. And I mean, I loved it then. You know, I mean, baseball has always been in my lexicon of love. But yeah, I mean, this is a great film, and definitely a sports movie as well. I think
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
quantify it as a sports movie, but I mean, there's nothing bad about it at all. I mean, it's so funny though because I'll talk to people, and you know, one of the questions that I ask people is name me your top three films. You know, I love that question, and and this one gets thrown in there. It's been thrown in there quite a few times, and I'm always shocked by that when I hear it. I'm like, The Sandlot, because you know when I first saw this movie, I never would have guessed this would ever make those lists, and this is what makes talking to individuals about movies so special, and this is why I love movies so much. Is that you know it doesn't matter how big the hit is, as long as you've seen it and it resonated with you, you may love it, and it may be. It doesn't have to be everybody's favorite movie. It could just be your favorite movie.
Yeah, look, it's the same equivalent of a lot of people don't like to watch A Christmas Story, but I love it, and I'll watch it on repeat. Like when they do the TNT or whoever does the just streaming and all. I don't care. I can watch that movie at any point for whatever reason. I love watching that movie on Christmas Day, and I can just watch it over and over and over, and I don't think twice about it. Do I watch it any other day? Nope. But during that time, I do. Same thing. Elf has become that way for a lot of people. There's a lot of these movies that come along that become timeless classics. Sandlot is definitely one of those. Now, that said, for a long period of time, I would have told you that the movie Sidekicks, which is next on the list, was a timeless classic for this Chuck Norris fan. Dude, I love that movie so much.
I
I loved
remember
it.
still talking about this film. You going to see it, you coming to my front door and having a conversation with me about this movie.
I
And
loved it.
I remember that conversation very well. You coming to the door and being like, "I just saw Sidekicks," and I was like, "That's awesome, man! How was it?" 'Cause you had seen it before I did, and you're like, "I liked it, man. It was you liked it then a lot. I know that."
I just remember things from it. I will never forget. And it left an impression. And actually, oddly, Chuck Norris in that movie benefited me in a couple of fights. He talks about punching somebody in the sternum to knock the wind out of him. And I ended up using that one day in a fight to get out of a fight. But it was because I remembered Sidekicks, dude. I remember it's Jonathan Brandis, Chuck Norris, karate
Bo,
movie. What's
Bo
that? Bo Bridges. Oh, I can do a Bo Bridges impersonation. Here it is. Look, I'm Bo Bridges.
it's great, man.
if you're only watching, if you're only listening to the show, you just missed my impersonation of Beau Bridges. Just missed it.
Yeah, Joe Piscopo and Danica McKellar from Wonder Years. I mean, it's actually a really good cast.
It's a great cast. It's a corny movie though in retrospect. Now again, remember ninjas, but they couldn't use ninjas because 3 ninjas would come out at some point in this time frame. But you do have Jonathan Brandis doing karate with Chuck Norris. I remember seeing it because my dad knew who Chuck Norris was. So my dad was a Chuck Norris fan. Or my dad liked some action movies from time to time, not many, but he knew who he was more than I did. But seeing Chuck Norris and Jonathan Brandis, it kind of like father and son. You can go see a movie, hang out, watch some karate.
Directed by Aaron Norris as well.
Oh, there we go. Aaron Norris, who would end up in Delta Force 2. Don't ask me how I know that, but I do.
Ends up in a lot of Chuck Norris stuff too. But yeah,
he sure does. He really does.
But yeah, I mean, I liked Sidekicks. It was fun. I mean, Jonathan Brandis, I always hated. I liked him, but I mean, I always hated what ended up happening with him in his life, and the late Jonathan Brandis. He was a fun actor. I mean, I enjoyed some of his movies for sure, and of course,
he was
Ladybugs.
Oh yeah, Ladybugs is a classic. Yeah, total classic, and it is a bummer for him. It's one of those things of like, I guess he was in our age bracket. Or at least on screen, he felt like he was. So I remember following him a good bit all the way into like he was on a show called Sequest DSV and other stuff. Like I just remember having this sort of like, oh, he's cool. Like I like that guy. But Sidekicks was another reason why I tended to follow him around. Now, I don't know where this movie lies in terms of where it lands, rather, in terms of his career. But this is the boiling point with Wesley Snipes, and that comes out on April 16th. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Is this one of his first movies?
No, he's done some movies at this point. I mean, he's gotten kind of hot because of Passenger 57 and White Men Can't Jump and all his movies,
that's right.
Wildcats and stuff like that, and Major League. So I mean, he's been around for a while. This has it's a great cast. That's what brought me to this film originally. It's Wesley Snipes, Dennis Hopper, Lolita Davidovich, Viggo Mortensen, sorry, and I was all in.
Yeah,
this movie.
I know.
As a matter of fact, I know I talked about it with you back in the day. I was
sure did.
all in on this film. I was like, this is, and they did a great job on their trailer because they put every scene you'd want to witness in this movie in that trailer, and then it was the biggest piece of junk film I've ever watched. It was awful. This is not a good movie. I want y'all to understand. I catch a lot of flack. From you about not hating movies. This is not a good film. I did not like this movie. I walked out of this movie. I didn't walk out of it. I mean, I walked out of it after it was over, thinking to myself, how could they miss on this with all these guys? Like, this is a great cast. I love all these people. It was bad, man. It's so boring.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not an action movie at all, and it's marketed to be an action film. And the damn thing's called Boiling Point. Only it never, boils over. It just sits there, simmering. Doesn't do anything else.
I want y'all to understand. I was quiet because I was laughing so hard. I was starting to cry because there's no hyperbole in his statement. I've said it before, but he really does enjoy a lot more about movies than I do. Not that I'm pickier. I may be more critical. Tony is equally critical, but he can be like, yeah, I saw that, but I can put it past me. I sometimes can't get around it. For him to state that this movie in that capacity, the story, the experience you just got, that's a once in a lifetime experience for that to even happen. And I'm sorry, that you had to watch that miserable movie, but my God, did it not just give me the greatest, the greatest laugh in a long time. So thank you, Dennis Hopper. Thank you, Wesley Snipes. Thank you, Lolita Davidovich, and our good friend Viggo Mortensen for making a crapper that gave me a laugher.
It was. I mean, I at this juncture, like Dennis has had so many great movies, and one of my
Oh yeah,
favorite movies that he's had that came before this was a movie called Flashback with him and Kiefer Sutherland, which was on my has been on my top five, top 10 for many years, and I love that film. So I was in the at this point I'm all in on Dennis Hopper films, and he's going to make like two or three that I'm going to be like, what are you thinking? And this is one
right.
of them. And Wesley Snipes and Dennis Hopper, and their names were above the title. Like it was this big Wesley Snipes Dennis Hopper film. I just thought there's no way that could possibly miss. Oh man, it missed the target by a mile.
It is really it's really tragic. Now I kind of you know what? We should post the trailer in the Facebook so that people can at least experience the trailer because that's tee up is so good. I'm going to go watch the trailer, so we might as well let everybody else watch it just so they understand. Yeah.
Trailer is brilliant. I mean, this is like the total antithesis of Jack the Bear. Like Jack the
Right.
Bear, you know, they should have taken their cue from the people that cut this trailer because
Right.
brilliant. It's a brilliant trailer. It's well done. I'm like, I'm ready for this film. I was all in. I was all in. I went to the movie. I did my part. I saw it at Carmike 10, first run theater. It stunk. So that's what happened.
Well, that said, that is obviously not the pick of the week, but but I do believe you have a pick of the week. Do you want to cue that up? And I mean, obviously, I think people could figure it out. We almost should make a game. But if you're really paying attention to Tony's enthusiasm about a certain movie, you'll figure it out each week. But what is your pick of the week this week?
There's no question. Jack the Bear. Jack the Bear is a must watch. You must watch this film. It's brilliant from start to finish. It'll tug at your heart. It's a great movie. It's got great performances all around. It's lost in the. It's just it was a film that got lost in the shuffle, and it's one of those movies when people ask me for recommendations of movies that they maybe never heard of. This one, Digstown, always come up. I'm
Yep.
always about Digstown, and I'm always about Jack the Bear because I know most people will look at me and go, "Never heard of it," and then I can really kind of go back and teach somebody something. So I like that. So Jack the Bear, without question, pick of the week.
That's perfect. I'm like I said, I'm going to add it to my mix. Maybe something we can start doing. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but maybe something we can start doing is if I can find. I used to have this link that you could type in a movie and it would show you where you could get it. You know, obviously rental and streaming and all that. And so maybe we can add that for on the Facebook page for the pick of the week. We can go ahead and just hey, here's an easy link for you to go find the movie to watch it. You know, something fun.
Good.
All right, and lastly, I'll let you kind of carry this way. You wanted to talk a little bit about old Donald Sutherland here and a little tribute to him, but I'll let you kind of tee that up and carry that portion.
June 20th, we lost an absolute legend, Donald Sutherland, one of the all-time greats. I mean, I don't know how many people are listening and watching that have gone back and watched this man's. This man's done so many movies, a couple hundred films. I mean, this guy's done every kind of role you can imagine, and he's kind of a big part of what we do in the '90s here with like movies like Backdraft and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and JFK, which he pretty much steals the entire movie in one scene. I mean, he's just brilliant, and I think everybody who ever worked with Donald Sutherland, and I did not have a chance to work with him, unfortunately, but I know a lot of people who did work with him and say he's just an absolutely wonderful man. And I really loved him as an actor. And so if you get a chance to put on a Donald Sutherland film this weekend or something like that and pay a little tribute to the guy, there's a whole list of movies that this man has made, and he's made a lot of great ones. And in our era, he's made some really good ones, but in his '90s era, but check out some of the other ones as well. And I mean, Eye of the Needle would be one that I would go back to, like from like early '80s, late '70s, and stuff like that. I mean,
100%.
he's got
100%.
great movies, and you should definitely check out his list of films and watch a few of them.
There's a sci-fi movie he was in, and I don't remember who else was in it. Was it
Puppet Masters.
Puppet Masters? That movie was so good. What a great film. I don't know when that came out, but I just know that movie for me was one of those, caught me off guard, really well made. I love the solution to the problem is very simple and thoughtful. It's got a apocalyptic feel to it. It's a great film. But Donald Sutherland is fantastic in that. And that was one of that, like as a younger person, I remember that's one of my exposures to him. And in case anybody really needs a more modern reference, he plays the older kingy type guy in the Hunger Games movies, but forget that. Go back and look at his category. Like Tony said, his library of content is well worth exploring. You get some performances out of this dude that are just legendary.
Yeah, I'd go back to some of his '70s stuff too. I mean, he's really good. I mean, you know, there's a Bertolucci film that he's in. I mean, it's like 5.5 hours long. So, I mean, a lot of people aren't going to enjoy that one as much. But the movie 1900 is wonderful, where he plays like this fascist character in old Italy. I mean, he's got so many great performances. It's really tough to even narrow it down to a list. But he is going to be missed because he's one of the iconic actors of all time.
That's great. Yeah, he will be missed. And I again, now's a good time to go celebrate his work. If you haven't, just give him a shot, go backwards towards it. That's going to do it for this episode. We hope that you have enjoyed it. Again, as we said in the beginning, if you are enjoying it, make sure you join the community and chat with us, ask questions. We'd love to know what your favorite movies are. What's on your list? What's your take on The Sandlot? Have you seen Jack the Bear? Do you actually like the movie Boiling Point? Any of those things are relevant questions, statements, or comments we'd love to have. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter. And then, of course, you can always throw comments in the YouTube side of things as well. And so with that said, I'm just going to say thanks again for hanging out. We're in episode, what are we, 7? Is this 7? Lucky number 7?
7, yeah.
Yeah, we made it to number 7.
We made it. We did it.
We did it.
Yeah.
But we've got lots more to go, and it just gets bigger and better and crazier from here. So if you haven't listened to the previous episodes,
big things coming up.
Yeah, there's big stuff for sure. The entire library is out there for you to listen to, both on YouTube and your favorite podcast. Please do that. I'm Drew Hall, and with me, as always, is
Tony Nicniciotti.
And we'll see you somewhere, but it won't be in a movie theater because they're all closed.
Be safe, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.